Aili, we were talking earlier about, when we're talking geopolitics, we tend to get stuck on, well, what's Washington doing, what's Moscow doing, and how does this play in terms of, grand strategic visions for the region, including military and obviously then economic aspirations. What it isn't always so easy to do is to figure out where the voice and the needs of the indigenous peoples sit within this geopolitical overview. So what's your take on that? Is your voice listened to, basically?
Well, thank you for the question. I would like to say that we are talking about both globalization and nationalization at the same time, two mega trends, if you can put it that way. And from an indigenous view, nationalism has been, I guess, as powerful and as destructive as globalization has been. Because the Sami, we are a borderless people. So the states came and made borders through our homelands and separated us. And you cannot imagine how many practical problems that make for us in our everyday life, separated by borders. And such is also the history of many other indigenous peoples. So I kind of welcome globalization. I welcome building down borders, yes, because that will make our lives much more easy, I think, and I hope.
But it isn't the trend that we see in global politics right now, least of all among some of the big players in the Arctic. We don't need to spend too much time talking about building walls in the United States, but we know it is definitely a presidential agenda. We know that Russia has its own very clear, defined national interests when it comes to its Arctic role. So nationalism in the Arctic, far from being reduced, appears to be on the rise.
That is kind of disturbing. I was very happy to hear the foreign minister telling us about the importance of international cooperation. And it's important to the Sami people as well. And I would wish, and that is my challenge for the foreign minister, that she should look into the issue of cross-border reindeer herding between Norway and Sweden, our nearest neighboring country. And it's kind of a wall. They are kind of building a wall. Really? Not a physical wall, but there is an issue on moving the reindeers across the border. It should be addressed, and we should have a political solution so that Sami reindeer herders do not have to spend their time in the courtrooms. Well, that would be a cooperation issue between our neighbor country, also an Arctic country.
Totally. I love it when discussions like this produce concrete examples where we've got somebody else on the stage whom we can put it to immediately and get a response. Wonderful. So, I hadn't figured, I just heard it from Aili, that this is a real issue. You talk about openness and cooperation and how the Arctic, never mind all the tensions that we see elsewhere in the world, the Arctic can somehow ring-fence itself as a place of cooperation. And then I hear that even between two of the most friendly nations, Norway and Sweden, you can't even let the reindeer be herded across your borders. What's going on?
Well, we are very friendly between Norway and Sweden, aside from winter sports. You have to know that to get the whole picture. I think it is a very valid point that Aili is making. And it is, of course, as everyone who knows anything about reindeer herding and also I would say all the traditions, all the ways of living that is connected to reindeer herding, knows also that it's a very sensitive topic at times. Also locally in Norway, it's also sensitive among countries. But I think it is a very valid point you're making, that this is an area where we do not want to see new borders being raised in a way, or new fences or new troubles. And of course, I mean, this is something that we, in our, I would say, very good dialogue also with Sametinget, needs to discuss, because probably there is there are several answers to this question. There is not one single answer, and you have to deal with concerns on both sides to make this work in a good way. We need to make it work in a good way.
But what's holding you back from making it? I mean, it sounds very easy, given your extremely strong relationship and given your intent to make the Arctic as cooperative as possible. It just seems, you know, how can we believe that all of your big visions for Arctic cooperation can be fulfilled if even this, you know, seemingly more local, more small scale and more easy to solve problem isn't being solved?
But it isn't always that easy to solve, and I think that if you have knowledge about reindeer herding and also the way people live around this.
Well, I confess I can't claim any knowledge whatsoever on reindeer herding.
No, but I'm not specifically talking to your knowledge here, Stephen. But knowing this field also means that you know that it is complicated. It is about people's income. It is about how people live, and it's not a very easy black and white answer, or yes or no answer. And that is why I'm saying that in the dialogue with Sametinget, this is an important issue to talk about, so we can make sure that we find a solution that is workable on both sides and for both countries, and also for people on both sides that has reindeer herding as their way of living.
I'm not saying this is easy. It may seem easy, but it's not. But the Sami Parliament in Norway and Sweden, we joined with the reindeer herder organizations, and we presented a solution for the government in Sweden and in Norway, and the government has yet to act on that. That was back in 2014. But luckily, this issue is mentioned in the new government platform. So I'm looking forward to you acting on that, especially when we seem to have a Swedish government in place as well. That is good news.
Yeah, well, that's good news in itself. Sweden does now, it seems, have a political way forward, and goodness knows, as a Brit, I'm very envious of them. But anyway, good. Well, I'm glad we aired that, because it is very good to drill down to specific issues which perhaps illustrate, you know, how complex sometimes the rhetoric of cooperation can be when you need to turn it into practice. It's not always straightforward. Turla, you bring to our discussion expertise in the science of climate change and climate research, and I just wonder, as you know, we've kicked off Arctic Frontiers this year with a discussion about sort of the geopolitical situation, whether you feel confident that amongst the players in the Arctic there is a real sense of common commitment, trust and cooperation when it comes to meeting the climate challenge.
Yes, I would say so perhaps with a few exceptions.
Yeah, I've never heard yes delivered with such a tone of doubt.
No, so it's a long tradition of collaboration in the Arctic, and of course with Russian scientists, with US scientists, Canadian scientists, Norwegian, Danish, and so on. So I think that there are traditions for good collaboration, and we have many examples where people have worked together. And I mentioned these upcoming cruises, for instance, there will be scientists from all nations. But of course, there are also things that are making the collaboration more complicated. And for instance, so one thing is as simple, but also some important thing as the funding schemes. So our funding is mainly national. So there are Norwegian funding, there are Russian funding, there are US funding, but there are not so many funding schemes for really collaboration where people from all countries can come together and work on something, particular problem. So that's one thing that I would say could be an advantage if there were funding schemes. But then of course we also see that increased political attention is also somehow making things more complicated in terms of collaboration. So that has to do with access to each other's waters, for instance, or access to each other's infrastructure. So with this Arctic Council agreement signed in 2016, at least the intention is to regulate this, but I don't think it's really been tested yet if it will work in practice. But at least that's something that we can hope that this will make it more easy to really do collaboration for the Arctic.
Just on the climate change question, and again the way it feeds into politics, are we at a tipping point where in the Arctic region itself we are seeing such obvious signs of climate change and therefore lifestyle change that it's reached a point where it's glaringly obvious in the communities themselves and in the capital cities that, you know, something profound has already happened, whether it be in, you know, I remember making myself a visit to Alaskan communities that were seeing sea rise levels that were threatening their communities. Also ice fishing and hunting on the ice offshore was becoming more difficult because the ice wasn't there for long enough or wasn't thick enough. To what extent are we seeing now the real evidence that's changing people's lives and therefore having a political impact?
Yeah, so there is a very strong climate change going on in the Arctic, and particularly in the Arctic. So that's where we see the strongest warming, and of course it relates to disappearance of sea ice. It relates to disappearance of snow, and it's simply making the ground more darker, and it's strong feedbacks in the Arctic. So nowhere else I think we can see so large, not so large warming, but also so large impacts on perhaps on the local population. Of course, there are other regions with tipping points, with desertification, for instance, going from vegetation to desert. That's another place where you have these clear tipping points. But also going from ice-covered winter ice to open water is also a large.
But it makes the Arctic very important politically because, as Søreide says, if the evidence is more manifest, more visible, more sort of visceral here than anywhere else on Earth, it sort of makes the Arctic hugely important as a symbol, apart from anything else. And do you all, in your different ways, work with that?
Arctic Parliamentarians had our meeting last autumn in Finland, in Ari, and we made a statement where we hope that the heads of the Arctic states would meet. And as we've been discussing here, we work with local level and for the living conditions for the people and their future to support education, to transition for renewable energies and all kind of that be. But then it's also a global issue, as you mentioned here. The climate change is so rapid here, so it's twice as quick as is in other places. So it would be really, really important, not only on the Arctic level to work with this theme, but also in a whole global-wide level.
But I think that's a very important point, because we can see it as a symbol, but we can also use it as an opportunity, like we've done in Svalbard, using Njolsund as a research platform for many countries. Because what we need is more countries to be aware of this challenge. We need to make people understand that the vulnerability of our climate and our societies is much greater than I think many people know. And when we have I would say the unfortunate or fortune, depending on how you see it, to see the climate change quicker and also more evidently here than other places, this also opens up opportunities to make use of that in a good way. We can create awareness of issues that we could not have done otherwise. And we have our wonderful research community, not only in Svalbard, but also in Svalbard, who are, in my opinion, using this very smartly to also connect, as I think you mentioned earlier on, that people elsewhere in the world need to know what is happening with climate change. It is soon going to hit them because we saw it first here. And this provides, even though it is very dramatic, even though it is going to change the basis of our societies for generations to come if we do not act, still we have an opportunity to do something about it.
Let me share a perspective on that, because you have pointed out the impact on individuals, families in the Arctic, the hunting resources further out, which causes more dangerous conditions. The location of the fish have changed. But when you're trying to get the attention of government, unfortunately, and this is a very unfortunate reality, sometimes the voices of the indigenous peoples, the native peoples in these small, very remote villages, it's a long way to Washington, D.C. for those voices to be heard. And so that has been a struggle, and it's been very painful, I think, for many to feel like they have not been recognized. So what we've seen recently, where there is a greater awareness from the Department of Defense, the assets that were established decades ago, 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, after the war, the early warning radar sites that are established out there that dot the coastline. We're all there right on the edge for a very specific reason. Well, over the years, what has happened to those military assets? Those assets that help us not only understand information, but also from a weather predicting situation. Those are now threatened because of climate change. Mm-hmm. So the airstrips that are out there that allows us to service them, the ability to just keep them safe, all of a sudden the military is looking at this and saying, we've got to invest millions and millions and millions of dollars. What's going on out there?
No, absolutely.
That is what is prompting some of the change and an eye rather than the focus on the individuals who are living there. It's an unfortunate reality,
No, it's an interesting point. Aili, I know you want to say something, but can I just very quickly get a couple more voices from our audience in, because we're running out of time. We're going to be in the red zone. No, I can't. So in that case, we won't. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. We don't put hands up because you'll make me feel guilty, because I think we're out of time. We have to give you a coffee break before we come back. But Aili, I know you wanted to just say something. I'm going to let you have the final word, and then we're going to break for coffee. So off you go.
One point on adaptation to climate change. It's true that indigenous voices are not heard by decision makers, and that can be fixed by making us the decision makers. More self-determination will make it easier for us to adapt to climate change. That is important.
Yes. It's a great note to end on. So we're going to leave that thought hanging in the air. I've been a rubbish timekeeper because I wanted to get more questions in, but don't worry, I promise you I'll be better in the next session. I'll make sure that I spend more time getting thoughts and questions from the audience. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a slightly briefer coffee break than we planned because we have overrun a little bit. We're going to have 20 minutes, just 20 minutes for coffee. Then please back here promptly. But before you go, give a very warm thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.